Hey everybody, this is Chris Thompson, and welcome to session number 17 of Brain Software with Dr. Mike Mandel. He was once a telephone operator, grows his own sprouts, and thinks Al Jolson was the greatest entertainer of all time. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, he was, although Michael Jackson's certainly in the top two. But yeah, Jolson was the best, greatest entertainer.
What about Bono?
I will not dignify that with a response, Christopher.
Mike knows U2 is one of my favorite bands, and he can't stand them. So.
Some things are unfortunate. Now, listen, yes, I was a telephone operator, too. I don't know where you got that snippet of information, but that was in the early 1970s.
You always mention it when you talk about how great it is now to have been doing your own thing for so long.
Well, that's true. I have been doing my own thing for so long. But back then, it was great to not yet be doing my own thing, knowing that one day I would be.
Right.
Well, where are we? Kids, come on back.
That's begin. Hilarious. All right. Well, we're not editing.
No, we're not editing.
We're just going to keep going.
This is live, ladies and gentlemen. You hear it as it happens.
All right. So let's start this podcast with a discussion of handwriting analysis and hypnosis. The reason I bring it up is because it seems to me every time that you do a hypnosis training, somebody asks a question that inevitably leads to an interesting discussion of handwriting analysis, and the whole class ends up asking more and more questions. So I know you studied handwriting and graphoanalysis, in fact,
Correct.
In Chicago?
I did my internship there, but I have done both the American and the European systems.
And so what can you tell us about handwriting analysis, and does it relate to hypnosis?
Well, to a huge degree, Chris. My doctoral thesis was correspondence between graphoanalytical structure and hypnotic susceptibility, and proving that you could determine from handwriting the best ways to put someone in a trance, and also the sorts of procedures to use when the person was in the trance. For example, in letters like, we're talking cursive script here, letters like H's, where there's a loop going upward first and then down to make the bottom part of the H, or in any letters that rise into the upper zone. When there's a large loop, the person will tend to be quite imaginative and open to a wide variety of philosophical thoughts. So if I'm seeing large loops in the writing, the person has a lot of imagination that can be engaged very readily. If the person's writing is nearly vertical, I know the person is highly intellectual, their head is going to rule their heart, their emotions will not engage as easily. Likewise, if the writing is far slanted to the right, they'll tend towards even impulsivity. Their emotions will engage very readily, and it would be very good to use emotional appeals in hypnotic procedures rather than sheer data of the more vertical line writers. So there's all kinds of things you can do with it.
That is interesting. Now, can you use handwriting therapy or graphotherapy in trance?
Well, you can do anything in trance that you can do in a waking state, and I've never been asked that one before, but that's a very good one. In fact, all neurolinguistic programming, NLP, has built-in hypnosis to one level or another, whether it's overt or below the surface. So a lot of different interventions create hypnotic states, even if they're doing it inadvertently. Therefore, since we perceive, as Dr. Bandler so well put it, or put it so well, to correct his own grammar here, and saying his, now I've dissociated.
You've stolen the grammar police line right from me.
But Bandler said that, hypnosis is an amplifier. It's an amplifier of experience. And so any intervention, psychotherapeutic or otherwise, that we use, if we do hypnosis at the same time, it's going to amplify whatever we get. So if we are doing graphotherapy, which is a reasonably new field, whereby one changes the handwriting itself through practice, writing maybe 10, 15 minutes a day, perhaps in a journal, building new traits into the handwriting, those traits will find themselves working out into the personality after maybe 28 to 30 days. They'll start to show up. One of the easiest graphotherapeutic changes you can make is to underline your signature with a single left to right underscore, nice and straight and solid, which builds in the trait of self-reliance. And when I dealt with a lot of kids with ADHD and so on, kids with low self-esteem, I would invariably teach them to underline their signature when they signed their name. And sometimes the teacher would say, "Oh, no, you're not supposed to underline your signature. That's not part of the signature." And the kids were taught to say, "No, my therapist, Dr. Mike, says I have to." So that's what they would do. And if you don't underline your signature, it's a really good trait to build in a very, very easy way.
Now, you said it left to right underlining. Does it matter if you're right-handed or left-handed?
Handedness has no effect on handwriting at all.
Okay.
Neither does gender. But we say a left to right underscore because in handwriting, in Western society, the past is to the left and the future is to the right, which is the direction the linear progress of time occurs when one is writing. Consequently, an underscore done from left to right goes from the past into the future rather than sticking back in the past, which brings in the trait of withdrawal, which is someone who will tend to be stuck in the past in their thoughts and so on.
All right, I'm going to start using an underscore and put an arrow on the end of it. Darn it.
Nice. I wonder what that's going to do, Dexter.
That was a very good regression to the last podcast. Oh, hey, speaking of regression.
And we are.
Let's talk about hypnotic regression, because on the last podcast, we started talking about dealing with problem people, toxic people, etc., and bullying and all sorts of other interesting things. Now, there is a lot of people out there who've dealt with this, and it has affected them, and it continues to affect them to today.
You mean insofar as their behavior is still affected by it?
Yes, either their behavior is affected or their emotional state of being is affected by some trauma from the past.
Right.
So how does hypnotic regression work? The reason I'm asking it now is not only because I'm thinking of the last podcast, but we've had a few emails come in from people asking about it, and some people claim to have done past life regressions, which
Right.
I'm personally not a big believer in. It's just my own, I don't know, it's not one of the things that I personally believe in, but I certainly understand.
He used to believe it when he was Napoleon.
But I mean, the idea of age regression and regressing back into the past. I mean, yes, we've all experienced the past, and it doesn't take any new belief system to understand that you could position yourself in the past, deal with things that happened to you back then, and then come back into the now and carry the new resourceful states with you. And we've talked about this before.
You've opened a lot of interesting points there, Chris. Like you, I am not a believer in past lives. However, having said that, when I'm dealing with a client doing timeline therapy or whatever, if their model of the world does hold to the reality of past lives, I don't tamper with it.
Exactly.
I never mess with their model of the world, so I will work within their model of the world to make the requisite change. Now, regression is an interesting thing, and taking someone back to a previous state, like what, if you put someone in a hypnotic state and take them back to being 6 years old, they're not only seeing themselves in an event, which of course is which is hypermnesia, where you're recalling something with a great deal of vigor. But when you regress someone, you're putting them back into the event. They're actually inside it. They're experiencing it from the inside. So you regress someone back to age 6, they will print rather like a 6-year-old kid would at that time, because only those resources will be available. Of course, now we have the regression paradox, because if you regress them back to before they met you, they can't be hypnotized yet because you haven't hypnotized them. So, I mean, there's all these wonderful things built into it. But regression is a real thing, hypnotically speaking. I've seen cases that have had abundant research where, remember when a baby is born, part of the test they do is the pediatrician will take the newborn baby and run his thumbnail up the sole of the baby's foot, starting with the heel up to the toes, up through the middle of the foot.
Babinski reflex.
And it causes the Babinski reflex, which is where the foot flexes and opens, the toes spread. And when kids reach about age 1.5 to 2, the Babinski reflex disappears and the plantar reflex emerges in its place, which is if you run a thumbnail up an adult's foot from the heel to the toes, and you have to do it on someone else. You can't really do it on yourself. It's the same reason you can't tickle yourself. Anticipation. And so if you do this on an adult or an older child, the plantar reflex is exhibited instead, where the foot curls downward in an concave arc towards the thumb. Now, if you hypnotize someone and regress them adequately to before age 2 or 18 months old, you have to ensure that they have the linguistic skills to follow you back to the present world. But when you take them back there and run your thumbnail over the sole of their foot, even without pre-framing this with some sort of seeded suggestion, oh, this is going to happen. No. If you just do the procedure, you'll discover the Babinski reflex will return, just as though the person was actually that age.
That is bizarre. So have you done a lot of age regression on people?
No, not a lot. A sufficient amount, though, to speak on it as a complete expert.
The reason I asked is I'm wondering if you have any particularly interesting stories about it where you've used it to help somebody change in a way that they wanted to change.
I worked with a young actor a number of years ago, and he went through a horrendous situation in school where he was actually it's a very odd thing because it's a role reversal for what we typically see with cases of sexual abuse. This guy in his early teens was propositioned and tampered with, shall we say, by a female teacher, quite a beautiful female teacher, and he was acting like Mr. Stud around campus at age 14, and when this woman got him back to her house, and he, of course, was completely inexperienced, was unable to perform, and drew the conclusion that he must be gay. And this was a nightmare for him. And so I had to regress him back to the situation, which is what he wanted to do. And we used a bit of Gestalt therapy, and he was yelling at his teacher, telling her, like, you've ruined my life. You made me think I was gay and all this stuff. And then it's instantly, okay, now regress, be her, switch, you're her now. And he would talk as this woman and saying, I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought you were this and I thought you were that. And regression in that case caused a massive amount of change very quickly. I don't typically regress people because you don't need to.
How close is what you did with that fellow to abreaction?
Well, very close, really, because he was crying and discharging a lot of negative emotion. So I would say so close as to actually be that. And that's one of only 2 cases where I intentionally abreacted someone.
Okay. Because I know that your model of the world is de-traumatize first.
Right.
Or model of therapy, I should say. Model of the world. Go around de-traumatizing everyone everywhere.
I didn't even notice. I'm glad you corrected it.
De-traumatize first, except, I suppose, if the client's model is, I must be abreacted. I must go back to the situation and experience it again.
But that is de-traumatizing him, right? It's just a rather clumsy method. You don't have to re-experience it. You're much better using the rewind technique, which, once again, we're back to human Givens theory, which agrees with the Mandel model of de-traumatize first, where you're going to have the person do essentially a model that came out of NLP, where they're going to dissociate and run the event backwards and forwards at multiple speeds, faster and faster, until it shifts it out of the amygdala. It changes how it's processed. All of these power therapies essentially do the same thing. Neurologically, they take the trauma, which is right brain, and they move it into the amygdala, give it a linguistic tag, fire it into the hippocampus, put it in the context of one's life, which Timeline does so adroitly, and then fires it along the parahippocampal gyrus, left brain, pass through the Broca's speech center. It becomes actualized in the prefrontal cortex. And then the person, he's cured. He's all right now.
Make it sound so simple and elegant.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, let's move on. And here's one that I've learned about the Enneagram personality typing system from you. And I find it fascinating. And I wonder if we can talk about what it is, how people can use it, maybe where they can go and learn more about it, and how you might, as a hypnotist, utilize your knowledge of somebody's personality in trance work.
Well, that's a really good point, Chris. For those of you who are not familiar with the Enneagram, and it's Enneagram, it means 9-pointed figure. The Enneagram is a personality typing system that goes back to ancient Persia, which is modern-day Iran. And the Sufis came up with this system that is absolutely remarkable. I've found it one of the most useful things I've ever had access to as a tool working with clients. Basically, it states there are only 9 different personalities, and we are all able to be dropped into one of those 9 slots. Now, there is a degree of complexity beyond that oversimplified model.
And it is only a model.
And it is only a model. And so we're saying numbers 1 to 9 describe these different personalities. And each one of us will be one of these personalities. We never change. And it's based on something called an original wound. And what it does is it changes the way we respond to life, because within each Enneagram type, each one of the numbers, and no number is any better than any other, we all have our liabilities and our strengths. But in each one of them, there are then 9 levels of integration and disintegration. And in the 3 upper levels, we're very integrated. The middle levels, we're average. And the 3 lower levels, it's getting very dangerous and problematic and will exhibit all sorts of dangerous behavior because we are now disintegrating. The thing that makes the Enneagram method so wonderful is it gives us real key methods of discovering where we are in the chart and means of becoming more and more integrated, because I believe we all need to be seeking greater integration all the time. We never arrive.
So let me just stop you there for a moment. So there's the 9 personality types, and you're saying the model suggests you cannot change your type, but you can move along the spectrum from disintegrated
to integrated within your type and become a better person.
Exactly.
So let's give you the 9 types in a nutshell. Type 1 is the perfectionist, prone to black and white thinking. They are always trying to make everything perfect. And so they see themselves as helpful, and other people tend to see them as interfering. And so, you'll know people in your own life. They're often identified. My wife has pegged this very well. She's really good with the Enneagram, better than me. And she's noticed that there's a lot of physical characteristics with the different numbers. For example, the 1 often has a mouth that is like a straight line. It's just set. And they're very rigid. They beat up on themselves a lot. They're always seeking perfection, which of course is impossible. And 1s can often be determined from their handwriting because the T bar, when you make a small letter T, will be right to left instead of left to right. And you have to look at it carefully to determine this. This is willpower directed against self. And 1s will have personalities where they beat up on themselves internally for not being perfect, with a critical inner voice, which is often a parent's voice. And I often say to 1s, you have a critical voice in your head, don't you? Like beating up on you. And he says, well, yeah, everybody does. Well, I don't. I got a voice egging me on to do the bad stuff.
I can already see how that would be useful in hypnosis in terms of change work now.
Of course. Yeah. And you can change the timbre of the voice, change it to a different person, do all kinds of things. Then there's type 2. Type 2 is the people pleaser. The type 2 is the helper. They get their identity by doing for others. And they have many selves because they become a different person depending on who you need them to be. Your 2 friends are the ones you can phone at 3 a.m. because the pipes burst, and they'll drive 30 miles and come and help you clean it up, and will be wonderful at that. But the problem is with the 2s is they don't realize they have any needs. They deny their own needs. It's a one-way intimacy, where in reality, the 2 needs to be needed, which is an interesting paradox. They're often identifiable because they have a twinkle in their eye, a very specific eye look to their eyes that identifies them as a 2. Then type 3 is the American dream, the succeeder, the success, the go-get-it. 3s are the ones who can go for it. They can climb up the scale. There's a lot about appearance. But the problem with 3s is they're much more worried about the packaging than the content. They're much more worried about making a good presentation. And that can be a dangerous thing as well. Type 4 is all emotion. They have no boundaries between their internal states and the external world. So if they're in a great state and they're happy, everybody else should lighten up because the world's a great place. If they're in a bad state, how can anyone be happy? The world is a horrendous place. The 4s wallow in their emotions. They love black and purple, and they define themselves by what they're not. I'm not the kind of person who likes yellow flowers. It's that sort of thing. And you, Marilyn,
I think we both know a particular 4 from our class.
Yes. And Marilyn Manson is a 4, and Edgar Allan Poe, but they are, fonts of incredible creativity as well. Then there's the 5. So if 4 is all emotion, 5 is no emotion. 5s get their intellect by what they know. I am what I know. So they're very much out of touch with their kinesthetic, with their physical body a lot of the time. And they tend to live in their heads if they're not careful. They can be very miserly as well, so they have to watch that. But they have a lot of strength of intellect. Type 6 is the most dutiful type of the Enneagram. The 6 is burdened by anxiety and self-doubt and doubt of others. They have an inner committee in their head. It's hard for them to decide. They worry a lot, but when the chips are down, they're the most solid of all. They're rock solid, completely dependable, and absolutely durable and what they seem to be. The 6s are very, very good in that regard. So they have a lot of self-doubt, but they have a lot of strength as well that they're usually unaware of. Then the 7, it's lighten up. The 7 is life is fun. Peter Pan, take it easy. I know your best friend died, but that's 2 weeks ago. Get on with your life. Let's go out and let's go to the amusement park and have fun. The 7s consume life. Let's hurry up and go so we can hurry up and come back. And so they can be gluttons. They can eat a bag of cookies. They can overdo a lot of things like that. My best friend in the world is a 7. But they tend to delete all of the negative stuff in their past. They only remember happy childhoods, whereas the 4s tend to delete some of the positive stuff, and the 6s have very, very selective memories, but 7s only remember the good stuff. So they're very, very much the monkey mind. They have irons in a lot of fires. They're good at a lot of things, but they can be dilettantish. Then there's type 8. Type 8 is the aggressor, the natural leader, the one who, basically the only one who can kill the evil 8s. That's why you need the good 8s, because the evil 8s are the worst of all, because when evil 8s go nuts, they're the ones who go into malls and shoot millions of people with machine guns, whereas 4s tend to kill themselves and 6s become paranoid. Every number has its problems. But 8s can be extremely violent when they're out of control, and that's why you need good 8s to kill the evil ones. The 8s are the white knights when they're at their best, and they want to right the wrongs and do everything right and protect people. When they're at their worst, they're very bad. But everyone is bad when they're at their worst. Then there's the 9, which is my friend Chris here. The 9 is the likable one. Everybody likes them. They're easy to get along with because they can mirror and switch to whoever they're with. One of the hardest things for 9s is to have all their friends together at once because they don't know who to be.
It is so true. A 9 makes an excellent hypnotist.
They do, because they blend so well. Now, Chris, I've said many times, you're probably the most integrated 9 I know.
Thanks, buddy.
Because 9s, now having said that, just kidding, because 9s,
I was waiting for that.
9s can be essentially hollow and content-free, but Chris is very integrated and has a very strong sense of self.
But it is totally true, though. If I am around a group of people, as a 9, when I learned this from you and I said, oh, I'm definitely a 9, I mean, if I'm talking with someone at a party and then someone else comes and approaches, I feel like I need to make eye contact and acknowledge the other person and try to engage them into our circle of conversation, and it's just my natural tendency.
Well, I mean, the American astronaut Gus Grissom was a 9 as well. But you know what's interesting about this? This is just a thumbnail sketch, and for those of you who wish to look into it further, I suggest you check out one of the fine books by Don Rizzo and Hudson, Wisdom of the Enneagram. You can get it at Amazon. It's a phenomenal book. You can take the test and discover for sure which type you are. You can look on iTunes and check one of the podcasts or one of the apps that you can get. And also, Helen Palmer is a great Enneagram teacher. It's a wonderful method for understanding yourself and others, and we keep aiming for greater and greater integration.
You'll get the spelling in the show notes, but just to repeat what Mike said, it's ENNEAGRAM, Enneagram.
Oh, I thought you were saying Gus Grissom. You wanted the spelling of that.
No. Oh, we could put that in, but I don't see how it's relevant.
No, he's been dead for about 30 years.
All right, let's move on. A couple of questions that have come in. The first one, we got a question. I don't have the email in front of me, so I don't remember the fellow's name. I apologize. But we got a question about embedded commands in text messages. Now, Mike, I'm not going to put any names into this because I don't think we need them. But there is somebody out there who put a video
I'm
out.
very tempted, but I'm not going to.
And it talked about how you could embed commands, i.e. analog marking, by, capitalizing the first letter of a few different words in a text message, and if you put those words with the capitalized letter together, they mark out a command. Now, okay. I'm laughing just talking about it, maybe tell me why this doesn't work.
Just listen to my tone right now, and you'll probably get a really clear indication of what I think about this sort of thing. When we put something in text, it is immediately apparent to the visual sense and leaps out. I mean, if it's italicized or capitalized or whatever, people have attempted to do this in advertising for years. My experience has been it really doesn't work that well. Embedded commands work best in speech because of data stream and because of the ability to get information past the critical faculty undetected. That's why it's verbal. There is a sequence to it, whereas if one is looking at something that is written as text, you can examine it, and then these things tend to jump out at you. I wouldn't waste my time with that sort of thing.
Okay, that's a good quick answer. I mean, I would also say my dad taught me to think in terms of extremes. So let's take it to an extreme and imagine that the words you wanted to mark out were in bold with a yellow highlighter and the text was blue.
Capitalized as well.
Yeah, I mean, how freaking obvious would that be? It's not going to get processed unconsciously.
Right. Let's dispense with it.
Okay. Next, we're going to talk about. I love this question. Carrie from Denver, Colorado, wrote in. She says, "I love the podcast, and I'm hoping to come to Toronto to study with you,
Carrie,
Dr. Mike.
come on to Toronto.
Can animals be hypnotized?" She went into some depth on why she was asking this, which I'll leave out of the email or out of the discussion.
Because she trains animals for a circus.
Yeah, she clearly works with animals and wanted to know if hypnosis works on animals at all. So I didn't know how to answer that one.
Well, that's a very good question, Chris. There are animals that can ostensibly be hypnotized. 3 of them, in fact. The reality is they aren't actually hypnotized. The 3 animals are rabbits and related conies, lobsters, and not necessarily Nova Scotian lobsters, but lobsters, and what's my third one? Oh, chickens. Now, there's a very old stage trick that magicians would do where they'd supposedly hypnotize a chicken, and they'd get a clucking, friendly, young, healthy chicken and put its beak down touching the ground and draw a line of chalk from where its beak starts, about a foot and a half long away from it, and hold its beak down on the end of this chalk line. And if you do this for about 30 seconds and let go, the chicken will stay there indefinitely. it's as though it focuses on the line and after a while gives up trying to get away and just assumes that it's stuck there. I mean, I've seen it done. It's quite remarkable. It's not hypnosis,
That is bizarre. So how do you explain that?
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea, other than maybe it thinks it's still stuck. Maybe do chickens think? I mean, they don't have reflexive thought.
Yeah, how would we know if it was hypnosis or just the chicken's not?
We know
or the chicken's not so smart.
You know, it's not hypnosis. We know the chicken isn't off somewhere planning, how to build a nuclear reactor
Exactly.
or Large Hadron Collider or something. The chicken is not capable of hypnosis or particularly complex thought. So we're going to presume it's something simple. And the greatest likelihood appears to be the chicken's head is held down. It doesn't work without the line, though. You have to have the line that it appears to be looking at. And there must be some sort of convergence of its vision. It's chicken vision. And it seems to think that it's stuck. So that's one animal. The next one is a rabbit, and this is a different phenomena altogether. If you take a rabbit and you hold it on its back, like you can hold a cat on its back, and you establish eye contact with the rabbit fairly close and stare into its eyes, what will happen is the rabbit will become rigid and cataleptic.
Oh, that's bizarre.
Well, it is. It's actually mean, and I wouldn't recommend doing it because I'm an animal lover, but the rabbit just exhibits something called akinesis. It just stops moving. And it's the same thing that causes, a deer or whatever to stare at headlights coming at it and freeze instead of running away or moving. The rabbit, its defense mechanism, it goes into the triple F mode, which is, fight, flight, or freeze. It's not fight or flight. It's fight, flight, or freeze. And if it is unable to fight to the death or run away, it will freeze and just become catatonic. And that's what it's doing. Human beings go through the triple F response too. And some of them, if they're under traditional layers of stress that we've lived with in North America for years, can cope well. Others, as we get the more modern layers of stress that tend to push us into the ozone, go past the triple F response and they go ATF, which is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
So the rabbit situation, really all you're proving is you can scare the crap out of an animal.
Pretty much, which is not very nice. It's just akinesis. Now, the lobster is the most interesting one to me because you take a lobster and you put it on its, I nearly said wings. You put the lobster on its claws, which have evolved from the wings of the fruit bat. You put the lobster on its claws, standing on its head. So essentially you put it in a tripod position.
Okay.
And hold it there for an extended period of time, which could be, I think it's just a couple of minutes. I mean, it's not weeks or anything because it's probably just asphyxiated. But you hold it there and let go. And the lobster will freeze in that position and be quite comfortable. And you can, tap its claw lightly with a pencil or something.
How does one measure the comfort of a lobster?
Well, I don't know. It presupposes that the lobster would move if it was uncomfortable, but maybe the head down wing position
it's just like the bunny rabbit.
It's the perfect. No, but maybe it's the perfect position for a lobster. Yeah. And you put it in that position. He's going, thank you. Thank you. Someone
understands me.
Has finally got it right and has put me where I want to be. So we have lobsters, conies, which are rabbits, and chickens, all of which exhibit, to get to this circumlocutory discussion point, all exhibit something that looks like hypnosis but truly is not.
And we can't obviously use hypnosis on animals, but there are a lot of interesting animal experiments. I mean, what was the name of the autistic woman? Temple Grandin?
I have no idea. I'm thinking of Gus Grissom again. I don't know.
She invented the modern day slaughterhouse for cattle. And
why did you extend the first syllable of cattle?
I was going to say cows. I was going to say cows, and then I realized
the way you said it with such relish was frightening. She extended the modern day slaughterhouse for cattle. Oh, it was horrible!
It was one of the got stuck in my mind. Going, am I saying cow or cattle? Cattle.
I know. It was very, very interesting how that happened.
That happens occasionally. Anyway,
wait, pause there before you go on, because there's another point here that's crucial.
Okay.
A friend of mine went through a phase where, well, actually he's not a friend anymore. He's one of those toxic people that we identified and got out of our lives because life is too short. But he went through a phase where I don't know how he started doing this. He'd go to say thank you, but instead he'd start by saying thanks, like when he'd, get change in a restaurant or something. But he'd put a U on the end by accident. So he'd give him his change, he'd go, thanks you. And then, and it became a habit. He couldn't stop doing it. And I thought of that when you just did your whole cattle slaughterhouse discussion.
That's hilarious. Anyway.
It's funny that you gave it credit, but
I just want to bring closure to the discussion on animals and hypnosis because obviously animals react to stimulus just like people do. And Temple Grandin, I believe that's her name. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but
Is that one name or two you're saying?
That's her full name.
Okay.
Yeah, and she was the one who...
Still not answered, but yeah.
Understood how these animals felt, and naturally they're going into a slaughterhouse. You don't want them panicking.
She created a humane slaughterhouse.
It's not humane at all, but it keeps the animals in line and calm until it's too late. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah, tell me nefarious governments aren't going to use that information.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a very nice use.
Or even a hypnotic discussion for that
No,
matter.
it's not. But I think it ties in only in that our brains work in a certain way.
Conditioned in certain channels. Yep.
So that's really as far as we'll take it.
Right. No, that was interesting. That was a good sideline in a way.
Yeah, in a way. Having said that, I'm waiting. All right, next question. Henry. Henry wrote in a question about using hypnosis for Forex trading, and this is a financial market term, I guess, but I know neither of us have any experience in this, and I wrote back to him and said, look, hypnosis isn't, you're not going to use hypnosis specifically you're not going to get a product that is specifically geared towards helping you be a better foreign exchange trader in the currency market.
Put it out,
Maybe
Chris.
somebody has, but
based on the number of strange products out there, like you said, a hypnosis CD, if you're afraid of green frogs with yellow spots. I mean, we're practically getting to that point.
Exactly. So my answer to him was, look, and I want to see if you agree. I think you're going to agree, but I want to see if you have any other comments to throw in here, that you're not going to find a hypnosis product for every specific thing that you want to work on. But if you can go up, you always describe it as chunking up a level, right? Well, what is it you need in order to do? Yeah, what is this an example of? Thank you. That's a great way of putting it. Well, it's an example of being very focused on a task. Let's say that was what you needed. Well, then use hypnosis to be focused on a task, and something like the Navigator system, which will keep you focused in going in the right direction, or Mike's Peak Performance CD. Those are both the right kinds of products. But I would say stay away from somebody who's putting out a product that is so darn specific that it could only ever help like a few people on the planet. Because
I'm going to put out a CD or a download that is purely to help people sort through hypnosis downloads.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
There's a specific one.
So there's the answer to that one for Henry. Let's now shift. Stanley in Honolulu is our first questioner from Hawaii, so really cool to see that. He had a question, and I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but he essentially said, look, I want to go see a hypnotherapist to help me work through some stuff that I don't want to talk about with anybody. So what he's saying essentially is he wants to do content-free therapy. So how can hypnosis work? Should he go see a therapist? Will a CD be helpful? He needs a content-free approach, obviously, because he doesn't want to talk about whatever it is that's bothering him.
And that's often the case where clients have personal matters that they want to deal with, or it can be all sorts of things. And yes, there are ways of dealing with these things hypnotically. And be very wary of any hypnotherapist or psychotherapist who tells you that you have to, bring all your dirty laundry out and air it in order for them to help you. That's absolute nonsense. People can permit the therapist to work within their own comfort zone and make huge amounts of change without knowing what it is. I've worked with clients who've gone through, horrendous sexual abuse and all sorts of problems they did not want to talk about. Neither did I want them to talk about these things, because it would really just amplify and fire off these old archive states that they don't need. So instead we treat them content-free, meaning they know what they are. Their conscious and unconscious mind knows what the problem is, but I have no idea because I don't need to know in order to help the person with it. And so that's where something like my art gallery technique works exceptionally well, and my universal therapy technique, both of which will enable you to fix deep down problems without any idea what the heck you're even dealing with. And both of those will, of course, be taught at my hypnosis training, The Architecture of Hypnosis, in Toronto at the University of Toronto campus, September 24 to 28th of this year. We need you there.
It's going to be awesome. So with that said, we're running over the half-hour mark here now. Let's call it the end of session number 17.
I'll get a therapeutic metaphor.
Yeah, that's right. So I was exactly that's what's coming next. So give us the metaphor, and we'll close off the show.
In the 1950s, a number of Russian musicians toured Canada, and their government sent them, this was during the Cold War, sent them as ambassadors of goodwill, and incredible Russian musicians, classical musicians, would perform throughout Canada, through Ottawa, Toronto, and Vancouver, and so on, the larger centers. And they were, of course, absolutely world class. And the Canadian government, under pressure from a manager of a particular artist, was inclined to send a Canadian artist to Russia to reciprocate. And it turned out to be Canadian brilliant pianist Glenn Gould. Now, Glenn Gould was 24 years old at the time, essentially self-taught, and used to rehearse the pieces he was going to be performing by reading the sheet music, which is quite remarkable. He played in a ludicrous position, his head almost touching the keys, sitting on a stool instead of a piano bench that was almost broken away. But his skill was like nothing anyone could remember seeing. And so his manager pushed to have Gould go to Russia and do a tour, and the Canadian government was essentially apologizing in advance, saying, well, we know we have nothing to offer the Russians, but we'd like to send a performer there. So the Russians agreed, and Gould was to perform, I think, a few concerts, one at the Moscow Conservatory first, and a couple of days there, and then in Leningrad. Well, this was May the 7th, 1957, and the 24-year-old Gould took to the stage at the Moscow Conservatory to play. And the place was slightly less than half full because no one was remotely interested. And he began to play the Goldberg Variations by Bach, and the place went wild. And the standing ovations were lasting 5 minutes after songs. At the interval, people ran out to phones and phoned their friends and relatives and said, you've got to come to the conservatory. Something wonderful is happening. And by the end of the tour, everything had sold out. They were selling over 1,100 standing tickets in the venue so people could watch this remarkable performer playing J.S. Bach with such consummate skill, and Schoenberg and others. And no one could believe he was so good at this. It made no sense because he was Canadian.
And self-taught. Interesting. I love that. All right. Well, that is the end of podcast number 17, session number 17 of Brain Software with Dr. Mike Mandel. I'm Chris Thompson. Dr. Mike is in the house, as always, and we will be back on podcast session number 18.
Thanks again.
All right, Mike, are you ready to play? Have you got the Marshall plugged in?
I'm ready to put the Stratocaster on. Click in the Crybaby Wah-Wah Marshall is ready to go. Let's take it.
All right, hit it, Mike.